The Catholic Men's Podcast, helping you find good works of literature for the Catholic gentleman. 400 Things Cops Know. Street Smart Lessons from a Veteran Patrolman by Adam Plantinga. Introduction. I became a police officer because I liked the thought of varied, challenging work. I was interested in criminal justice, and I wanted to see some action. The idea of kicking in doors and chasing down felons appealed to me. Beyond that, I'd been a writing major in college, and my impression was that police work was where some good stories might be found. I think I was right about that. I've just finished my 13th year as a patrol cop and my first year as a sergeant. I was an officer with the Milwaukee Police Department for 7 years, and I am currently with the San Francisco PD. I've worked days, midnights, street crimes, and the footbeat. I've been a field training officer. 13 years is far from forever, but it's long enough to have picked up a few tricks along the way. Long enough for the color of my uniform shirts to have faded from a navy blue to a dark purple. Long enough for some of my police patches to fray. Most of the situations and scenarios I describe in these pages are things that I've experienced firsthand, but I don't write this book to portray myself as some kind of police expert. I'm still learning every day, and the things I don't know about the job would fill a much bigger book than this one. Now, this work came together for 2 reasons. 1, I like to write, always have, and 2, I'm fascinated by the body of knowledge that comes from police work, which is simply one of the most engrossing professions around. Although my hope is that it will be difficult to put this book down without a greater respect for what law enforcement does, these pages aren't filled with accounts of cops swooping in and saving the day. Police work is eminently frustrating, and the triumphs are often minor. 400 Things Cops Know reflects this reality. In addition, I don't attempt to put law enforcement up on a pedestal. Indeed, I take our profession to task for some of our weaknesses, biases, and oversights. But in doing so, I feel I've done a service to the job by portraying things as they actually are, because sometimes cops are better than people think. Sometimes we're worse. Sometimes we're just different. I make generalizations in this book, but they are born of both my experience working for 2 different metropolitan agencies and dialogues I've had with cops from across the country. While agency protocol and criminal code vary among jurisdictions, urban police work in the United States has a distinct sameness to it. I could have a conversation with an officer from Cleveland about law enforcement that would be very similar to a conversation I might have with a cop from Dallas or D.C. We would talk about how this line of work is alternately rewarding, fierce, ridiculous, and terrifying. We'd express similar attitudes and concerns. We'd talk about how our uniforms are different, but the job is the same. We'd talk about the things we know. I wouldn't normally do a book of this kind on my podcast. Much like the events this policeman went through, his descriptions of everyday life on the force are gnarly and intense. But it's important to know what these men go through on a daily basis. I'm filtering out the bad stuff as I go along, but I would only recommend reading the full version of this book if you intend to go into law enforcement. Chances are you have no idea the ride you're in for. So here's a chapter titled 18 Things Cops Know About Use of Force. He which hath no stomach to this fight, let him depart. His passport shall be made. Quote from William Shakespeare, Henry V. 1. Police use of force can be broken down into 4 categories. TT, trained technique. This means whatever you did was precisely what you were taught to do in the police academy. DTT, dynamic application of a trained technique. You followed your training, but things got a little freewheeling out there. Maybe you put something extra on your takedown and accidentally put the suspect through a glass-top table. It happens. UJ, untrained but justified. You bypassed the conventional methods because the situation demanded it. Maybe you punched a guy in a bad place because it was the only striking surface available to you. Or you took a bite out of a suspect's ear when you were both rolling around on the ground fighting over control of a handgun. I gouged another man's eye once because he was on top of me trying to take my baton away, and I thought with reasonable certainty that if he got it, he would try to beat me to death. It isn't ballet out there. It's an untidy business, and you do what you have to. As the old quote says, Anything worth fighting for is worth fighting dirty for. BL, Bizarre Land. Perhaps inspired by the latest kung fu film, you went off menu and did something that no reasonable cop would even consider. This is when you explain your actions afterward to the shift supervisor, and he cocks an eyebrow and politely inquires whether you know any good attorneys. This is the arena where cops ultimately get disciplined, fired, arrested, and sued. It's not where you want to be. For some combatants, once they are hurt or cut, the fight is over. As a cop, you can never have that defeatist attitude. Getting injured is just the beginning, not the end. If you break your right hand, punch with your left. If you lose your baton, strike with your flashlight or your radio or a piece of brick from the ground. If you're fighting for your life, everything is on the table. Cheat. Pull out that fifth ace and keep swinging, even if you're not connecting. Stay in the fight until help arrives. Don't ever give up. Most people who fight with you are trying to get away. The fighting is a means to an end, namely escape. Once in a while, you'll run into someone who isn't trying to get away at all. He just wants to throw down or he wants to get in a gunfight. After a dust-up with such an opponent, your body is battered and aching. Your uniform typically ripped, your pants streaked with mud like working man's pants after doing a dirty job. But the feeling you have when it's all over is one that combines satisfaction with the relief of having just escaped something. It's a sensation you want to bottle. It's one of the greatest feelings there is. When you get home after such a day, whether you won the fight or not, a cold drink tastes all the better because you've earned it. It's a tough job, my old partner Rolf Muller liked to say, but that's okay. You wouldn't want something that was easy. 3. Getting a face full of pepper spray is like having barbed wire wrapped around your corneas, like a small army of demons burrowing under your skin and cackling at your misfortune. After the initial exposure, you have a second or two of, hey, what was that? Then you tilt forward, head in hands, and moan. You hack like a 40-year smoker. You sweat, you burn. If you have contact lenses on at the time, kiss those suckers goodbye. And soon all the mucus in your body, all the snot of your past, present, and future streams down the front of your shirt. The only respite comes with fresh air and time, anywhere from 10 minutes to a few hours. I've been sprayed maybe half a dozen times on this job, both during training and as a result of the errant aim of my coworkers. I'd rather get shot than get exposed to that devil juice again. I'm completely serious. Give me a bullet in the meat of the thigh any day. 4. If someone fights you, you can't afford to lose. Assume they will try to take your gun and use it against you and your partner. Hit them as hard as you can. Make it the worst day of their life. 5. There are exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, if a car driven by a fleeing felon is speeding right at you, resist the temptation to shoot at it. First of all, your chances of disabling the vehicle with one bullet or even several are slim to none. The Drug Enforcement Agency helped illustrate this point by producing an instructional videotape where they had an agent roll up in a nondescript sedan, park the vehicle, and walk away. That sedan was then pumped full of bullets by other agents at close range. A total of about 500 rounds were fired, everything from .357 shells to .223 rifle cartridges. When the agents were done shooting, the first agent got back in the car, which started right up, although it sounded a little wheezy, and drove away. So there you go. Second of all, killing the driver doesn't magically stop the car in its tracks. It just makes the vehicle pilotless. Best just to get out of the way if you can. 6. When you're in the middle of a fight, your adrenaline is pumping and you're feeling no pain. The problem is, the same is true for the bad guy. During one melee, I smacked a guy hard with my baton twice in the knee, and he looked at me as if I had just bopped him with one of those foam swimming pool noodles. Then he punched me in the face several times, blows that, owing to the adrenaline, I subsequently did not feel. It went on like that for a while between the two of us. 7. The way tasers work is by shooting out a pair of electrically charged prongs that stick into a suspect's body, causing painful muscle contractions that typically drop the target to the ground with a newfound respect for the frailty of humankind. One press of the taser's trigger equals a few seconds of incapacitating voltage, which usually gives you enough time to move in and put on the handcuffs. Once the trigger is released, the pain stops. The taser is designed not to cause any lasting physical damage, and studies have shown it to cut down on both officer and suspect injuries that may result from a protracted fight. The news gets around quickly not to mess with the taser, or the shaka, as it's known on the street. You train the taser's red targeting light on a guy's chest, and a lot of times he'll give up right then and there. He'll do anything to avoid the voltage. He'll even edge your lawn. But there are, of course, always exceptions. One of my coworkers told me about an incident where he zapped a 6'3", 260-pound drunk. The man shook his head as if brushing off a horsefly and then tore the prongs out of his body. "Is that all you got?" he bellowed. 8. People give off plenty of indicators that they're looking for a fight. Some precursors are obvious, like the clenched fists and the readjustment of the feet into an attack stance. Others are more subtle, like the lowering of the chin to instinctively protect the neck, or the rigid setting of the jaw or brow. Some people dry their hands on their pants to prep themselves for an assault. Many of these indicators are reflexive. People don't even know they're doing them. They're tells, just like the tells poker players have. So it helps to pay attention to these signs and signals, because if you see them coming from the guy you're about to arrest, take your baton out and call for backup, because he's not going quietly. He's going to make you work for it. 9. In a scuffle, you try to use the techniques you learned in the academy, but the academy can't simulate street-level fights, where tussles often end with everyone going down in a tangle, much like that human pile in comics where the bad guy escapes from underneath while the cops fight each other in a cloud of dust. Officers have even been known to accidentally handcuff each other in these types of scrums. 10. The Supreme Court decided some time ago that as a police officer, you're justified in using force one increment up from the force level you're facing. You don't have to wait to let a little resistance turn into a lot of resistance. In other words, you don't have to fight fair. You are legally entitled to give them worse than you get. Generally speaking, this means that if someone threatens to fight you, it's appropriate to spray them with pepper spray. If someone shoves you, you may hit them. If someone punches you, you may respond with your baton. If someone goes for a knife, you don't try to roundhouse kick it out of their hand, you go for your gun. The reason for this one increment up approach is simple. Anyone who decides to fight with the police is automatically dangerous. The police have to win that fight, and you don't win a fight by being tentative or defensive. So it's ill-advised to punch your opponent and then step back and study the effects of your punch. It's bad practice to get in a boxing match. Situations deteriorate swiftly, so you're quick to go hands-on, and if you have to hit someone, you hit them repeatedly until they've stopped resisting and are under control. 11. The general public doesn't always understand use of force dynamics in police work. Maybe it's unreasonable to expect them to. Police departments do what they can to explain them, either through media channels or during periodic citizen police academies. But deep misunderstandings continue to drive a wedge between the cops and the public. Now the public and the media provide police oversight. That's fine because cops carry guns, drive large cars very fast down busy streets, and take away people's liberty. You should have oversight. You also understand how people can criticize cops and their tactics without fully comprehending them, much in the way you might heap verbal abuse on your favorite NFL team's offense without ever having played a down of organized football. But it would be nice if the public and the media sometimes gave you the benefit of the doubt. While media coverage of police brutality is commonplace, you rarely watch a news story about how officers took a violent suspect into custody using the minimum amount of force necessary, even though it happens every day, because, after all, what's interesting about that? That being said, you'll still see cops who have a knack for escalating even the most benign encounter into a fistfight. Maybe they got cut from the high school football team 20 years ago and they're still looking for payback. Or maybe they're young and unproven and think that if they're quick to shove some people around, they won't be perceived as weak. Whatever the case, they seem to want not just to arrest the suspect, but to teach him a lesson, failing to realize that there isn't much honor in kicking a guy when he's already under control. But these officers are in the minority, which is good because roughing up suspects unnecessarily isn't just wrong, it's bad business. You can lose your job, be charged criminally, and become embroiled in a federal civil rights lawsuit. As a police officer, you have to be better than that. And most of the time, you are, respecting the law even if the criminals don't. In the words of one Milwaukee police deputy inspector, you have to guarantee someone his constitutional rights, no matter how much of a jerk he is. 12. The headbutt, if done right, is a showstopper. It feels like a bowling ball has just exploded into your skull. 13. In many careers, crucial decisions are deliberated in meetings with whiteboards and breakout sessions. Options are weighed. Exploratory committees are formed. Ideas are mulled over and then discarded. Gourmet coffee is consumed. Perhaps finger sandwiches are brought from the catering joint down the street. The whole process can take hours, days, weeks. One of the most crucial decisions you make as a cop is shoot or don't shoot. Given how quickly situations can go all sorts of wrong, you will probably have about a second and a half to deliberate before you make this call. Critics then have a lifetime to pick apart your decision over that coffee and those sandwiches. 14. Having to fight with women is the worst. You sometimes tend to go a little easier on a woman than you would on a man in deference to the fairer sex, and they make you pay for it. Their fingernails rip your flesh. They go for your eyes and below the belt. They spit on you and pull your hair. When you're a cop, unfortunately, all chivalry gets you is hurt. And in the public's eye, you always look like you're in the wrong when you go hands-on with women. Actually, some people's idea of police brutality is anytime the police win a fight. Such people take the peace in peace officer a bit too literally. It's as if they expect you to forego physical violence altogether and hand out demerits or pelt your foes with origami paper cranes. 15. Victims of physical violence sometimes say they got beat up for no reason. This happens once in a while, but unprovoked street assaults by strangers are rare. There is usually a reason: a racial insult, an uncontrolled drug debt, revenge. It's always something, just not something the victim necessarily wants to tell the cops. 16. In the old karate movies, they talk about never taking your opponent lightly. A skinny, untrained teenager can shatter the orbital bone of a man twice his size with a single punch. A victim who has been shoved can land wrong and break his neck on a street curb or suffer a hematoma when his skull strikes concrete. Street fights have no padding and no regulations and are typically fought over surfaces with little give, like the sidewalk. The results are bloody and unpredictable. 17. You will get hurt on this job. It's a certainty. It's the cost of doing business. After 13 years, I've been socked in the face, kicked and headbutted, had a chunk taken out of my right palm, and been hit by a car driven by a fleeing felon while I was on foot. During melees, I've sprained both my wrists so badly that I couldn't put on socks for a week, and smashed up my left elbow to the point where, even years later, whenever I rest it on a hard surface, it feels like it's on fire. I've been black and blue from head to foot. My right ankle still makes unnatural sounds after I rolled it going over a fence in pursuit of a suspect. But my injuries pale in comparison to those of other cops I know who have wrecked lower backs and bulging discs in their necks from traffic accidents, who have sustained broken ribs from fights with combative suspects, who are convalescing after being shot multiple times in the chest during close-range gunfights, or who have had fingers bitten clean off by plumb crazy people. You tend to get excellent health coverage with this job. That's good, because you use it all the time. 18. There's always someone out there tougher and stronger than you. You'll be dealing with graduates of the state pen who manage to get ripped even when prisons remove all weights from the exercise room. Guys who have practiced gun takeaway moves in the yard. Convicts who've been in the life a heck of a lot longer than you've been a cop. So you have to use teamwork. You have to be smart. You call for as much help as you can, and if some citizen feels the need to challenge you on why it took 7 officers to take the lone suspect into custody, the answer is because 8 weren't available. So that's an excerpt from 400 Things Cops Know, and I wouldn't recommend it to the casual reader because it's very gritty, but if you intend to be a cop, absolutely, go dig up this manual. If y'all liked what you heard today, please write me and I'll continue doing more excerpts from this book. Thank you so much for listening, it's good to be back, and Godspeed.